But then my mother said, she said, if I had known, I would have had an abortion.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 138. Yesterday, I participated in a mindfulness practice specifically for MPEs, or people that have had a misattributed parentage experience, and I wanted to share about it for a minute or two in case you are interested in participating next month. This was put on by Right to Know, as in you have the right to know. Their website is righttoknow.us, and this particular event was called Community and Connection. Now, this is not one of their recorded Zoom events. This was a private, almost more therapeutic event that they put on yesterday. If you're interested in attending one of these, you can go to the righttoknow.us website and click on the events tab or the events link. And you should see for every month, they will have a community and connection webinar. So this was mindfulness, and it was put on by Jason Hobbs, who is a licensed clinical social worker, and he also is an NPE. And he brought us through a body scan and then talked about disenfranchised grief. And in the body scan, most importantly, he just reminded us to pay attention to the present moment without judgment. And that was especially helpful to me as we were scanning through the different sections of our body, is to just notice the itch, notice the comfort or discomfort, notice the clothing against the skin, and not necessarily to have judgment about it or to want to fix anything. It was a really nice mindfulness practice. I would definitely do it again if they ever have him on again. And then after our body scan, he went over disenfranchised grief, which is something many of us as NPEs feel. I have spoken about it before, but just a reminder that disenfranchised grief is when it's feeling grief, it's feeling sad, but it's when you don't feel you have the legitimate right to that because no one's actually died. And he reminded us we absolutely have a legitimate right to feel that grief and to feel that loss and to go through the stages of grief because an NPE is, in fact, experiencing disenfranchised grief. He also spoke about ambiguous loss and all of these things you can certainly Google about them. There's a lot more information these days about this topic. So thank you so much, Right to Know, for putting that on. I also had one more call for a volunteer, and not for me. I don't need the volunteer, but it is for Right to Know, and I said I would mention it briefly. One of the founders of Right to Know, Alesia Weiss, is looking for a volunteer coordinator who has skills in nursing or social services, but is also an NPE. She kind of needs a sidekick, someone willing to help her out. So if you are an NPE and you have nursing or social services and you'd like to volunteer in the community, please email Alesia at righttoknow.us. I will put her email link in the show description if that's something that sounds of interest to you. All right, and today we are going to go ahead and get into our NPE story. And today I am speaking with Sarah M. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
So nice to talk to you today.
So nice to talk to you and everybody out there.
Thank you for being willing to share your story today.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, should we get into it? Would you like to start with your family of origin and kind of give us some background information and we will take it from there.
Okay. I do want to start just by thanking you, Lily. This has been such a lifeline for me, this podcast, ever since I found out I was an NPE back in August of 2020. I'd be interested to know how many of us NPEs actually found out during COVID, because it just seems like such a strange time anyway. And things are just coming out of the woodwork. And that was something that happened to me. But when I found your podcast and listened to the other stories, it just helped so much to know that what I was experiencing was normal, that there was going to be light at the end of the tunnel, and that this was a whole journey that I was going through. In some ways, it's been very exciting, and in other ways, disarming. But in general, this podcast, every week I've listened to it, and just wanted to thank you and everybody else who's come before me, and hopefully I can pay it forward.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
My parents met in 1950, and I'm going to reference a number of sort of what I call family lore, because it seems like in my family, there are a lot of stories that were told over and over again, to the point where it was just sort of a given, or it was accepted as being the truth. And of course, we find out later on that what we accept to be the truth isn't always the truth. But in this case, the family lore was that my father was in college. He was at Yale, and my mother was at Smith in 1950. My dad came to Northampton with a couple of other friends in a car. I think one of the friends had a date and my dad didn't. And so they show up at the dorm, and my mother, who was quite beautiful, was sitting in the entry area. She was on something called bells, which was where the one student would call upstairs and tell the other girls that their date was there. Because, of course, gentlemen were not allowed upstairs in the dorms at Smith College in 1950. So my dad shows up with these two other friends of his, and he says, what are my chances of finding a date tonight? And my mother said, you have no chances. All the girls are taken at this point. And my dad looked at my mother and said, well, what about you? And my mom was somehow able to manage to find somebody to take her spot. And she went out with my dad, and the rest is history. In 1952, they were married. Subsequently, they had 3 children, evenly spaced. So my oldest brother was born, I think, in 1953, and then my sister in 55, and then my other brother in 58. I was born in 1967. So there was a big gap between my siblings and myself. At the time, that would mean that my oldest brother was 13 when I was born, my sister was 11, and my other brother was 9.5. And here's another piece of family lore, which is that I was almost born at home, because I was a planned C-section. Back then, if one child was a C-section, everybody else was as well. And so because I was planned, they set the date of my birth as 2 weeks before my due date. So the date that I was to have been born during the C-section was May 3rd, and yet I started wanting to come out on May 1st. And my mother thought it was indigestion. And my dad said, no, I think we really should go into the city and make sure that this isn't actually contractions. And sure enough, it was. And I was born at 3 a.m. in an emergency C-section. So I grew up in a very strong family unit, especially on my father's side. My grandfather was sort of the patriarch of the family. He had 4 siblings, and they always had big Thanksgiving gatherings. And my dad had one brother with four daughters. And then in my family, it was boy, girl, boy, girl. We were very close. I knew I was loved. We grew up in a suburb of New York. My father worked on Wall Street in a firm that my grandfather was at. Big house with a pool and a cook and a nanny and people taking care of me. I went to private school. I had everything I could possibly need, classes, ballet lessons, didn't lack for anything in terms of material, clothes, toys, etc. The only thing that I really lacked was a feeling of belonging. I thought that before my NP discovery, I thought that the age gap was a big factor in why I didn't feel like I belonged. My oldest brother went to boarding school when I was 1. My sister followed when I was 3. And then the brother that I was closest to, who really, I would say, is that family member that intervened on my behalf so many times, really protected me as a child, actually all my life, went to boarding school when I was 6. And after that, I was pretty much an only child, except on vacations and holidays. And I always look forward to being with the entire family. As a matter of fact, I've always loved being in a household of a lot of people. And I find that holidays now with fewer and fewer family members can often be sort of sad for me. So I felt very loved, though, by my siblings, and they paid a lot of attention to me whenever they were home. And I guess the other thing that I sort of thought was interesting about my childhood, and I didn't make a connection until later, but I had read Danny Shapiro's book, Inheritance, before I found out I was an NP, and then I read it again afterwards. And when I read it, I had this big sort of aha moment, and I'm just going to read like a couple of sentences that really struck me. She says, all I knew was what I felt, which was a constant interior ache that propelled me. And she says that when she was a child, she used to snoop. And she would say, I would walk into each of their offices and rifle through the papers, covering their desks, careful to leave no trace. It wasn't anything specific I was after. It was just a sense that something was out of reach. And if I could only find it, this terrible feeling of longing would go away. I'd have my answer to a question I couldn't even formulate. And I really felt this. My siblings would go off to boarding school, and I would go into their rooms, and I would go through the drawers of their desks and look at photograph albums that my mother put together for them. And I would go up into my mother's office where she kept shoe boxes of photographs and report cards, not just for me, but for my siblings. And I could spend hours just looking at these items. And I wasn't, I think, really sure why. Just that I wanted to be a part of something. And I thought probably deep down there was some information that I would gather there. But I just thought that was so striking when Danny put her finger on something that I just never really understood. So when I was a teenager, I also went to boarding school. And I had a friend who had a similar age gap that I had. And I remember she once actually said to me, are you by any chance an accident? Because she was, in fact, an unexpected pregnancy, shall we say. And it never occurred to me to even think that that was a case. But of course, it was a very logical assumption. And so I did ask my mother that very question. And she repeated a story, which once again is part of family lore, which was that she really, really wanted me. She realized that since all my siblings were going to go to boarding school, that by the time my younger brother, he's not younger than I am, but the youngest of the 3 siblings, went off to boarding school, she'd be in her early 40s. And so she would be dealing with empty nest syndrome at a pretty young age. And so apparently she campaigned with my dad for many years in order to get him to agree to have a fourth child, which eventually he agreed to. I know they had to add on to the house when I was born so that there would be more room. And then my mother said she wanted a fifth child, and my father didn't want to do that. And she said, well, there's plenty of room in the house. And he said, well, yeah, there'd be plenty of room because I'd move out. And then a couple of years after that, I guess when they sort of noticed how lonely I was, my father said that they had made a mistake not having another child after me. And my mother said, no, we did not make a mistake. You made a mistake. So she made it very clear that I was a planned pregnancy, which I think is kind of interesting now in light of what I discovered about myself. My father was a big figure in our house. He was trained to be an engineer, but he ended up on Wall Street working for his father. And I think he would have been happier had he left there and done something in the engineering field. But there was definitely some frustration that he must have felt, and whether that I think it caused some stress in my parents' marriage. Certainly, my father was really tough on my brothers in terms of academic success, and he was athletic. My brothers were athletic. And what was interesting was my sister was as well, but I was not, and I wasn't strong academically. And I always felt in some ways inadequate in that way. I don't think anybody in my family recognized that I might be, that I might have a learning disability. I mean, as it turns out, I now know I have ADD. I looked at my daughter's report cards and have compared them to my report cards when I was her age. And there's very similar question about, we don't know where Sarah goes in class, but sometimes she's not quite here. And my daughter had the same diagnosis of ADD, and it makes a lot of sense now, but nobody recognized it in my household growing up because I don't think anybody had experienced it. I should also say that my parents had a good marriage from our perspective. I mean, they never argued in front of us. I think most of their disagreements, if there were any, were settled behind doors. They were very private that way. They had a lot of friends. They entertained a lot. They went out either to dinner parties or out to dinner with friends every Friday and Saturday night. From even now, people look at their marriage and think it was a very good one. And I believe it was a very good one. I mean, I know that my mother loved my father, was very devoted to him. They were married for over 60 years until my father died in 2018. So in terms of where I was in this whole story, my siblings they were going to college, they were getting married, they were having children. I definitely lagged behind them. And when I got married, I was 36, and my siblings had already been married for many years, and my nieces and nephews were already teenagers. I had my daughter in 2004. And my son in 2006, and then I was divorced in 2013. And around actually, my siblings and I continued to be very close. We actually bought property together up in Maine so that our families could be together at least for 10 days every summer. And we'd been doing that since 1992. It's been quite a while. The brother that I always felt closest to, who always was the one in between my parents and myself, we both became a little bit suspicious of our mother, and thinking that she was keeping secrets from us. And it was kind of with humor. It wasn't ever sort of a bitterness, but my mother would do these things which we would think, why? Like, for instance, we discovered when my mom was like in her 60s that she had been lying about her age. We're not talking like 5 years, we're talking 1 year. So when she turned 50, in fact, she was turning 51. There was like this big party for my mother when she had her 50th. And, looking back, you think, how could she have felt comfortable having everybody celebrate her 50th birthday, knowing that it was actually her 51st? I mean, that seems just kind of weird. And we found this out because my sister got a hold of our mother's birth certificate, and it said 1929 instead of 1930. And when we asked our mother why, she said, well, I guess all the other girls were much younger than their husbands, and so she shaved a year off. And even our father was confused. Like, he didn't even know that she had been lying about her age. It was just very strange. And then she'd also said that she'd always told me that she went to Smith, which I knew she went to Smith, but I assumed that she had been there all 4 years. And as it turned out, she'd actually only been there for 2 years. And in fact, when she was a freshman at a different college, she flunked out because she was just having too much fun going to, I guess, fraternity parties or something. So, when you catch your parent in some of these little lies, you start wondering, well, what else is she hiding from us? And we, every so often, my brother and I would kind of look at each other, whether it was a dinner with mom and she'd say something, and we'd sort of give each other knowing looks like there's got to be something she's keeping from us. It just seemed very strange. Our father died in 2018, and after he died, well, I should actually say my father and I were very close. He I ended up working with him for a little bit, and he, I think, of all of us, had the best relationship with me, probably because I was much younger. I was a girl. The expectations were different. And I spent more time with him. And I can also say that he ended up with dementia. And when he died, I was the only family member that was in the room with him, holding his hand. And that's not because nobody else wanted to be there. It was in the middle of the night. My mother was sleeping in the other room, and we knew he was dying. And I didn't want her to have to go through watching him die. And there were 2 other sort of nurses there, and I sat with him, and I wouldn't have given that up at all. I mean, I remember playing Frank Sinatra for my father while he was dying, and talking to him, and it was one of the most moving moments in my life. After he died, and I don't think there was any correlation, but I did take the Ancestry DNA test. I did it because my sister-in-law had done it, and she was talking about just how fascinating it was. And I guess I deep down wondered if there was something that I didn't quite expect or wouldn't expect, because I am Jewish. My father's side of the family, and I guess I should say my birth certificate father, as we know, but my birth certificate father's side of the family is from Germany, German Jewish, and my mother's is Lithuanian Jewish. So I pretty much expected it was going to be a given what I was going to see. Although, there were things about me, whether it was the coloring, I have very fair skin. I'm tall. I don't know, but there were oftentimes people would say, where are you from? And they'd be surprised when I told them about my family background. So when it came back, it was interesting because I got 50% of this was Eastern European Jewish. And then the other 50% was English, Scottish, French. And my first reaction was, oh, I guess this is the great diaspora. Jews don't come from one spot. And I guess if you go far enough back, you're going to find out interesting things. And then I called my sister up, and she said, oh, I guess that explains why I love Celtic music so much. It just seemed like, oh, yeah, I guess that explains it. So I really didn't think much of it, except it was sort of an interesting little, I don't know, piece of information. And, nobody else in my family had done it. So it didn't surprise me that I didn't see anybody that I recognized. And then I would say like about a year after that, so this is now 2019, a name showed up as a first cousin of mine, a man. And it was weird because as I said, my father had one brother, my mother had no siblings. So I only had 4 first cousins. And here was this man that had popped up as a first cousin. And my first thought was, well, maybe this is like my uncle had an affair and this is a love child. That was my assumption. Why I didn't sort of follow up, it's interesting because I recognized the last name. And yet I did not, I guess it's a part of me, just whether I wasn't willing or ready to sort of look into it, I don't know, but I didn't look into it until a year later, when this is now August 2020, and I was, this was middle of COVID, and I was up in Maine at our place on the lake with my mother, my 2 children, and because it was COVID, it was a very small group of us. So the brother, the closest in age to me, was not there with his wife or his daughters. My sister was only there with one son, and my oldest brother was just there by himself without his children. So I'm talking to my sister, who's sort of the family genealogist, and it came up, I don't know whether it had something to do with genetics and how fascinating it is. And I said, hey, I saw this on my, ancestry DNA, and this person, do you know who this person is, how he could show up on our, DNA? And my sister said, no, I don't know. Maybe you should write him and find out what he knows. So I did. I wrote him a, message, and I said, I don't know how you showed up on here, but do you recognize? And I gave a couple my last name and my mother's maiden name, and said, did any of those ring a bell? And kind of forgot about it until the next day. I got a response from him, which was kind of surprising. And he said, I don't know how this is possible, but I will tell you that, this is my father's name and my uncle's name is, blank. And all of a sudden I was I recognized the name of his uncle as the name of my father's, one of my father's closest friends from college, who lived down the street from us, and his 3 boys I grew up with. And it's unbelievable how these things happen. And I feel like I'm so lucky that I found out the way I found out, because my entire family was with me when I found out. So if you imagine, we're all sitting on the porch, and I had been talking to the brother that was closest in age to me, and shared this information with him, and he was equally perplexed. And these things are running through our minds, and then somebody shows up trying to raise money for the lake. And meanwhile, all I want to do is have this person leave, because I have a lot of questions on my mind. They're just kind of running through my head. And this person, you can imagine this stress is just increasing as we go on. Finally, she leaves. And I said to my mother, this name showed up in my DNA. And he says that he is nephew of uncle, and we were so close to this family that I called him uncle and his wife aunt. I mean, that's close. And I'm trying to sort of figure this out. And I jokingly said, "Is there something you need to tell me?" to my mother, who was at the time, I think she would have been 90. And if you can imagine, I'm sitting on the porch, my mother's sitting in the chair opposite me. The brother that I'm closest to is sitting right next to me. My sister's opposite, sitting next to my mother. And just the wheels are spinning in my head, and I'm thinking, this guy is the nephew of the family friend. Then that would mean that family friend is my ... And then I was like, Mom, is there something you need to tell me? Now I'm thinking, if she doesn't tell me the truth, I'm going to just explode. And my brother, who was sitting next to me, is looking at me. He said it was almost like cinematic, because he was looking at me and he was about to jump in and say, just cut it. Like, don't, what are you doing? Like, stop this. And I'm looking at my mother, who I can tell is processing this and is like on the verge of saying something. And I am so determined to get this answer. I said, Mom, is there something you need to tell me? And she paused. And then she said, well, there is something I need to tell you. And I was like, my heart just stopped. And she said, there was this one time. And I looked at my brother and I said, holy fucking shit. Sorry. Those of you, I mean, I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying that, but really, like, my life had just been blown apart. And from then on, anytime we refer to this moment, we call it HFS, because that's the only way we can describe it. As a matter of fact, my sister gave me a pillow for my birthday that has HFS embroidered on it. It's absolutely hysterical. And my brother, who was equally blown away, he just thought, I can't believe, I mean, none of us could believe this. I mean, there had just been such a lore about like how our parents were these happily married. And all I kept on thinking was, I can't believe this. And we were like, what happened? And, our mother said, well, I was mad, and, he was mad at his wife. I was mad at your father. And which doesn't really mad. Like, what mad about what? I mean, she wouldn't really give any information. And then she said, I didn't know. She said, he was sterile. And here's the thing. So, in fact, they'd adopted 3 sons. So they were not his biological children. And I had heard for a long time that the man that I will now refer to as my bio dad, yes, I heard that he was sterile. Obviously, he wasn't. But then my mother said, if I had known, I would have had an abortion, which I know why she said it. She said it because she was trying to make a point, right? I mean, the point was, this would have been so devastating that I wouldn't have been able to have you. But of course, the idea of being told by your mother that was even, that it's so unfathomable, right? I mean, it and so unkind in a way. I mean, I know she didn't mean it that way, but it was so awful to hear that she had repeated it another time to my brother, and he said, I don't ever want to hear you say that again. It was really wild in the sense that I had known my bio dad my entire life. I remembered him very fondly. He was funny. He definitely enjoyed spending time with his children. He used to bring the boys over every weekend in the summertime to go swimming in our pool. And he took a lot of video, like movies of us as children playing in the pool, or me dancing outside the pool. I remember one time he came to stay over with us. He was living in Denver at the time, and he came to our house and was playing on the piano, sort of like a jazz riff, and we were both sort of goofing around on the piano and making up stuff and just having a really good time. I mean, he was a lot of fun, and he made a really good steak. That was the other thing I remember about him. And those three boys, who were the oldest was my age, and then the other two were a couple of years younger, were like brothers to me. I used to go over to their house because they lived literally within walking distance, and we used to play together. One time we dug up a big ditch in the backyard, which was, we were sort of pretending we were minors, and you know, I don't know, like they let us get away with it, even though it made a big mess, as you can imagine. But all the neighborhood kids used to go over to their house, and we would get into little projects like that. He was, I'm told he was extremely smart. He was a lawyer, but he was also goofy, which I think in some ways I get my temperament, I think, from him. I mean, I went online, we're still up in Maine, and I went online and I pulled up his college photograph. And, I remembered him as an older man. And here I saw this picture of him young, and it was almost identical to me. I mean, that was the other thing. Like, I had always felt like physically I didn't belong in the family. I was much taller than my mother and my sister. I was, thin. I had a very long jaw, or chin, which I used to feel kind of embarrassed by, and thick eyebrows. And I looked at this picture of my bio dad, who, by the way, was dashing. And I compared it to my college photograph, and it was like there was no question in anybody's mind that this wasn't real. And I remember telling my nieces about this, and they were very skeptical until they saw these two photos juxtaposed, and it was like, yeah. And I know that other MPEs have talked about how it feels to not look like anybody in your family. I know that when my children were born, and my daughter looked just like me, and my son looked like my brother, and I thought, okay, well, this proves it that I actually do belong in this family. And that's so profound. I mean, that's that feeling of just not, knowing where you come from, and then to see a photograph of my biological father and just see myself. It was pretty amazing. My mother is a very private person. And of course, she didn't want anybody to know this. I guess we were up there in Maine for 2 more days, and we would have some conversations, although she was really tight-lipped, like would not tell me when it happened, how it happened, really why it happened. She said that she didn't want us to tell, or me to tell, the 3 boys that were his, sons, especially because the middle son, he was my mother's godson, and she was particularly protective about him, thinking he's a very fragile person, and if you tell him this information, it's going to be devastating for him. Which of course, one would think, wait a minute, you're worried more about how it feels for somebody else's child, when meanwhile I'm the one that's dealing with all of this and wanting answers. And the reason why I wanted to tell those boys is because, frankly, I wanted to start to meet my biological father's family. And the only way I could do that was if I told those three boys. I also really, really wanted to tell my biological father that I knew. And this was COVID. Unfortunately, he was in a nursing home in Arizona and had dementia as well. And so even if I had wanted to see him, which I wasn't able to because of COVID, I wasn't even sure he would know who I was at this point. But there was always that lingering thought, like, should I try? Should I, it was that for a year until he died, I was just sort of feeling really unsettled, that I couldn't talk to him. And I think like all I wanted to really know was, did he know? So my mother said, I don't want any of that family to know. Certainly, there was my biological father's had one brother who was still alive. I really wanted to talk to him. My mother didn't want me to talk to him. I would say one of those, the most beautiful thing, I should back up and say that did happen, was the way my siblings rallied around me. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking they went from being my full siblings to half siblings. And the brother closest to me said, you know what, without even prompting, he just took me aside a few, hours after this revelation and said, this only makes me love you all the more. You're all the more special to me because of this. And, that meant the world to me. And I know that there's so many MPEs that have not had such positive responses. And I really do feel blessed that I have the siblings that I have. I mean, they all said, this does not make you half anything. And they have been nothing but supportive. And I have to say, my mother, I just think she's limited in this way. I mean, I will, talk about the feelings that I felt through this, but I never judged her for having an affair. Especially since I had a divorce, it wasn't because of an affair, but I understand that marriages aren't always perfect and things happen. It was more, to me, the questions were, did she really see me as a child? And by that, I mean, I struggled in certain ways, whether it was academically or socially, and, I looked different, and those differences that I felt were never addressed. And one has to wonder, is that because they just didn't fit in with the whole scheme of the story? No children of ours have learning disabilities. So therefore we're not going to address them. And one has to wonder. As a parent, I think to myself, I look at my kids, my daughter and my son, and oftentimes I'll wonder, like, oh, that's so-and-so's smile, or I wonder if they got this talent from, their dad's side of the family, or, oh, I, experienced this when I was this age, and look, my daughter's experiencing it too. Like, I don't understand how my mother could have looked at me and not wondered, is this really, my husband's daughter, or could she possibly belong to, someone else who she obviously had sex with? And furthermore, I think to myself, how is it possible that she maintained a friendship with them? I mean, like, my mother and father traveled with my bio dad and his wife. And they, my mother considered his wife like one of her closest friends. That to me, I just think, how could one compartmentalize in that way? So I guess there's, real, real anger about that. I am lucky also because I never had to deal with the issue of my father. My father is my father. There's no question about it. And he's the man who raised me. They're his values that I carry with me. I love him and I miss him. And there's no confusion there. And I'm so fortunate that I never had to deal with this issue when he was alive. Even so, it is so confusing in so many ways. And there are so many times when my siblings and I'll start to sort of deconstruct what went on and just think, how is this possible? And this information has just accumulated as I've learned more things. So, for a while I was sort of in a lockdown in terms of not being able to talk to anybody on the other side of the family. I went online and I did a little sleuthing, looking at sort of other people's families' trees, and found out a bit about my biological family. I mean, it's so bizarre to be raised with one narrative in terms of, when my family came over, to now realizing that on my biological family side, we go all the way back to coming to America in the 1600s. I mean, I could be a daughter of the American Revolution. I mean, it's crazy to me, like the breadth of history that they have in their family tree. My sister, I think, talked to my mother on my behalf a few times because it was, I don't know, it's very hard for her to talk to me about this. But my sister, maybe a month after this revelation, asked her if she thought that my biological father knew. And my mother told her that when she was pregnant, he asked her if I could have been his or was his. And my mother said, "Don't be ridiculous, you're sterile." And then I asked her, "Well, how is it possible that you remain friends with them when this was happening?" And my mother, or remain friends with them, regardless of whether or not I was his, but just having an affair, and then continuing on as if nothing happened. My mother said, "Well, after I got pregnant with you, he ended up relocating to Kentucky." And they did. They moved to Kentucky for 2 years. And it was only when they came back 2 years later that they moved to their first house down the street. And then I sort of thought to myself, well, it's odd that he decided to live down the street from us, especially since then about 10 years later, they moved to Denver for work. And then when they came back, they moved to another house down the street from us. And I said to Mom, don't you think that's kind of strange?
Yeah.
And she sort of said, no, I don't know. But in thinking about it, I mean, that's got to say something, right?
Yeah.
And also, he knew what he looked like when he was a child, right? So
Yeah.
if he looked at me, he must have seen me, I think. Um, So about 6 months went by, and then I finally was sort of given the thumbs up, or not. I don't know whether it was more my brother who was kind of monitoring that side of the family, because he was sort of helping my mother deal with the third son. He just sort of needed some help financially, and my brother sort of was the one to sort of intervene and help out, and be the contact. And so I really wanted to talk to the oldest son, and my brother was like, well, I don't see what the harm would be in talking to him. So I called him up, and his first response, which I was kind of surprised by, was that son of a bitch, which was not quite what I expected, because in fact, I had always thought of him as a very loving person. But this son had a very, I guess, complicated relationship with his father. He sort of, from his point of view, his father might have had other affairs. He thought he was a narcissist. I don't know 100% sure, 100% whether I believe everything he said, but I did sort of feel like, there's more to this story. And, he said, and this is what's so interesting, is he said to me that he had asked his mother why they were adopted. And she said to him, well, I had 2 miscarriages, and I told your father that I wasn't going to try anymore. I was like, 2 miscarriages? Well, obviously he wasn't sterile if she had 2 miscarriages, right?
Yeah.
And so I said this to my mother. I said, did you realize that Aunt Holly had 2 miscarriages? And she said, no, that didn't happen. I would have known that if that had happened. Well, obviously somebody isn't telling the truth, right? And the question is, did my mother know that, he could have children? Maybe she didn't, because she apparently told him, don't be ridiculous, you're sterile. So, at one point I had this whole plot in my head, because I'm a novelist, and I was thinking, well, maybe my mother was mad at my father because she wanted to have another child. He wouldn't have another child. He was upset because she wouldn't allow him to have any children. And so, his wife was upset. He was upset at his wife because she wouldn't have any more children. And so my mom and my bio dad sort of like hatched this plan to get her pregnant. And therefore he would have a biological child, and my mother would have the child she wanted. I mean, that's very far-fetched, and maybe someday I'll write a novel with that plot, but it does one starts wondering about these things. So that's kind of that was strange. Obviously it took a while, maybe another 4 months. We swore, the oldest son to secrecy. And about 4 months later, he was like, this is really killing me. Like, I can't keep this secret for, much longer. I mean, I find myself when I'm talking to my brother, I sometimes say things that almost like I'm going to tell the truth, and you've just got to tell him. And I felt like it was really time. And I wasn't concerned. I mean, I knew that they were going to respond positively to this. I mean, the oldest brother said, you're one of us. I mean, now you really are my sister. And so we told the middle son, his first question, which was so endearing, was to ask about how mom was doing. He wasn't in the least bit appalled that this had happened, or, nothing that my mother might have been worried about. He was just concerned about her. And he said, I always sort of thought you reminded me of him a little bit. Your smile was kind of like him. And every once in a while, maybe I'd get a flash of that. Or, we would all go out to dinner as a family, and he seemed to hang on your every word. And then when we told the youngest brother, he said, oh, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And he said, Dad and I used to walk by your house all the time. Like, we would take walks, and we would walk like all the way to your house, not go in, just stand out there for a few minutes and then turn around and walk back. Once all the boys knew, then it was a matter of reaching out to my biological family, because of course they were adopted. They didn't have all the information that I really wanted, whether it was medical information or any sort of just what did my grandparents look like, and who were they, and what, I just wanted more information. The middle son he said to me, you really got to, talk to my cousins. And he contacted his favorite cousin. And he called me back, and she was a few years younger than I was, but he called me back and he said, she's dying to talk to you. She's so excited. And so I had my first phone call with that side of the family. I was so nervous. And she responded to me the way I know I would have responded to me, in the sense that she was so welcoming and warm and excited and just, equally blown away. But when she saw my picture, and then she said, I want to share this with, my siblings. And she set up a sort of family text and said, this is our cousin, our only cousin, because her father just had the one brother. Her mother had no siblings. So once again, I was like their only first cousin. And one of them looked at my picture and said, "You're one of us. You look just like us." Just to know that I was accepted, and that there was no resentment. There was just a lot of curiosity. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk to my bio dad ever. So this was like the closest I had. They ended up telling their father about me, and he was excited. He's the family sort of genealogist, and I, had a phone call with him, and he just downloaded so much interesting information about that side of the family. For Christmas last year, my bio dad's son, the middle one, sent me a box of photographs, just pictures of my biological father when he was a young man, and some letters that he had written, and pictures of my grandparents and my great grandparents. And it was like the best Christmas present I'd ever received. Just to have that piece of family history. I do think that I have just been so fortunate. I struggle with sort of reconciling, or I don't want to say forgiving. I just, it's hard for me to understand, because I'm such an open person. I would willingly give more information about myself if it weren't for the fact that my mother in particular just really is so private. But I sort of feel like this is my truth. This is who I am. I can't keep this bottled up inside. It's not fair. I'm not the source of somebody's shame, and I shouldn't be. And I am so grateful that at the biological side of my family has welcomed me, and that my family that I was raised with and consider my my center loves me all the same, if not more. But there are parts of me that still have questions, and I do get upset that I can't get the answers I want. I mean, I wonder what was going on in that marriage that my mother strayed. And it's not just me. I mean, my siblings are the ones that grew up while this was all going on. And the fact that my mother made certain choices that affected them, I think to myself, I was raised in the right family, and I'm so glad that my father is my father. I'm sure that my mother was nervous about, just feeling secure. What would have happened if the truth had come out? She would have had, 4 children, and, no husband potentially. I think about, at the same time, what would have happened if my father had found out while I was older. And, the only thing that I can imagine is my father saying, "It doesn't matter. You're my child. I raised you, and I love you, and, I wouldn't want anybody else." But what did my biological father know? And can you imagine if he did know, and if he watched me grow up and never said a thing, which is in fact what happened, right? He was at my wedding. He was, you know, there for my entire life. I mean, I always had, he was a constant. And to stand at the side and just not be able to acknowledge me, that must have, especially since he wanted a biological child so desperately. It's unbelievable to me that he was able to do that. And I wish I'd been able to sort of tell him, not only am I your child, but you have grandchildren. I don't know, this missed opportunity. My mother is 92, and sadly, she has cancer. I do feel like time is running out, and I want to make the most of the time that I have with her. And I am sort of looking or trying to figure out, what is the question I really want to know the answer to. And, you know, maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. But it's been quite a journey. And as I said, I think everything fell into place the way it was supposed to. I mean, I found out at a time when my father wasn't around anymore. I found out surrounded by my siblings, and my mother was still able to confirm what I had discovered. So there was not any question in that regard. I was able to tell my story to my biological side of the family. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to meet them soon. I'd like to go visit them. They're in California, but that's something that I'm very much looking forward to doing. You know, I'm very, very lucky. And not only that, I had the biggest questions about myself answered. And it so makes sense now. I mean, that's the part that I think means the most, is that I do belong somewhere. And now it's just a matter of continuing on and trying to forgive and appreciate who I am all the more.
Your siblings, both your, assumed original siblings and your new siblings, I'm so happy for you. They are also supportive in this. And your new biological paternal family, how sweet that they started this chat, and that must be very exciting for them. They have this first cousin. I can only imagine getting that box of photographs from the paternal family. That absolutely, for so many MPs here listening, would be like, yes, that would be the best Christmas present.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was just the right thing at the right time, especially since I was going through all that stuff as a child, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you think about, once again, that snooping and looking for things, and then to finally get my own box of stuff that I was given permission to snoop through.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Your bio dad sounds like he was absolutely very curious about you.
Yeah.
What you've noticed, and how he even asked your mom when she was pregnant, and then the living near you and moving within the vicinity of you multiple times in your life, being curious about you, walking with his son to your house. Yes. Yes, yes. Don't you? It was definitely somewhere in his mind. Whether or not it was ever confirmed to him, I can only imagine how hard that would be to think you might have a biological child of your own, and kind of be gaslit and told it wasn't yours. That would be so confusing.
Right. Well, and also I have to say, though, when she said you're sterile and he knows he's not.
Ah, that's true.
I think to myself, it wasn't really gaslit. Like, you wonder. I mean, there's so many questions, right? Like, okay, if he
Yeah.
knew he wasn't sterile, then why were they having unprotected sex? Blah de blah. But
Yeah.
whatever, you know, he knew that he
He
wasn't
knew.
sterile, and
You're
he's
right. He
looking
knew.
at me, watching me grow up, and he knows what he looked like at my age, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, even just saying this, it just makes me think he must have known, and how heartbreaking in a lot of ways it would be to not be able to acknowledge that parentage, because obviously it would have affected a whole other family.
Right? The picture you found of him when he was younger,
Mhm.
you said the college picture and how it was your face. It
Mhm.
looked like you. He had to have seen that
Yeah.
in you.
And he was probably looking for it, right? I mean, when we're
Yeah.
looking, just like you look at your own children and you say, up, I know where that smile came from, right? Um, it's just you just know.
I always find that so hard is, here we are trying to be compassionate to our biological parents and understand, okay, this would break up a family, this would break up a marriage.
Mhm.
He had shame, she had shame, they had an affair. But then you're the one that has to carry that. You're the one that has to continue with their privacy, their secrecy, and you're dealing with the consequences of it.
Right. And then it comes out in wacky ways, right? Like going on a podcast and basically telling everybody what happened. Right? But like yeah, you keep it bottled up inside, and meanwhile, who goes around with like an atom bomb that's detonated inside you and then keeps it in? That to me is so unhealthy.
Yep.
Um, you're right. It's not my shame. And frankly, I don't even think of it as my mother's shame. I mean, I know it was a different era, right? We're talking 1966 whenever I was conceived. And yeah, that was a different time. Um, but, I think that what's more damaging in general about that kind of keeping things to yourself is that you create this false narrative that your children are trying to live up to, like the expectation that nobody makes mistakes in life, and therefore if you, my child, make a mistake, that's all on you. It just, that is what I think is so unfair, and that's what gets me angry. I guess that's the only thing that I sort of hang on to, is that there wasn't that sense of what you're doing is impacting your child.
Mhm.
I guess, I mean, I do believe that my mother, at least when she was pregnant with me and I was, that blobby stage where you don't look like anybody, that she didn't think that I was, that I wasn't anything but my father's. But um, as I get older and I am like getting taller, and you know um, just looking so much differently than everybody else, wouldn't that be a sort of like a red flag? I don't know, maybe she's just so compartmentalized that she forgot about it.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to wrap my brain around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm learning a lot about compartmentalizing and what our brains do to protect ourselves and what stories we tell ourselves to believe. But that could be, yeah, it's hard to imagine what another person's thinking.
Oh, and also the other thing that I meant to sort of tie up was, when she said that I was born, that I was early. I in fact wasn't early, right? They scheduled me 2 weeks before my quote unquote due date. And the funny thing is that I must have been on time. And my mother kept a date book, because I'm a novelist and I was actually working on a novel set in this era. Even before I knew my whole NPE story, I asked my mother if I could have these date books. And so I actually had them. And I was able to look and see where she was when I was potentially conceived, and
Oh,
the time when I was supposedly conceived, my father wasn't even anywhere near. My father was like in another state.
Okay.
So did she, like, you wonder, like, did she fudge the date of my conception? Did she just, like, all these little things you start wondering, like, what was really going on?
Yep.
Was, were they really having a one-time shot at an affair, or was this like a little bit longer?
Yeah.
And it shouldn't matter. I don't know why it matters, but it matters to me.
Yes. So many questions.
Yeah.
Sarah, if people want to get in touch with you, could they do that?
Yes. Yeah. I have a Gmail account set up that is Sarah, SARAH, NPE67. So that's all one word, Sarah, NPE67 at Gmail.
Thank you, Sarah, for being willing to accept any emails. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.